Athletes are very deferential to authority, and it extends when they become adults from a psychological standpoint. You do not want to undermine the trust that's needed in the coach-athlete relationship, and yet at the same time, you do not want to teach your children that the conversations they have with their coaches are just for them, and they aren't going to talk about it. You don't want to ingrain that. I don't think it's a healthy human behavior anyway. The amount of couldas and wouldas and shouldas, we should ourselves all the way into doing nothing because we're not willing to make some bets on what I can do and what I can obsess over, and then just going after it. And I want that for people. I want that for my kids. I want for them so much so by their 20s and 30s, they have some things that are obsessive about, because it's a joy of life that, again, you can learn it through sport in a way that you can't anywhere else. Is going to school good for kids? Yes. Is going to sleep early good for kids? Yes. Is not eating candy good for kids? Yes. Well, if you ask your kids, do they want to go to school? If they like it at school? Well, if you ask your kids, do they like doing their homework? If you ask your kids, do they like eating their vegetables? They will say no to many of these things. But for some reason, sports is the one thing that everybody cares about whether they like it or not. And if we agree that doing your homework, going to bed early, and going to school is good for you, and we agree sports is on par with that, I think people like us believe sports is just as important as those things. Why is sports the one thing that people ask, do they like it?
Steve Mesler's athletic journey didn't exactly go according to plan, despite the fact that he is an Olympic gold medalist. But more importantly, it's the behaviors and lessons he learned through sport that ultimately helped save him during the most challenging period of his life. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, the host of Better Sports Parents, a podcast aimed at helping you, me, and everyone else out there become a better sports parent through a series of world-class conversations, and I mean that by the guests we bring on. They are high performers from across the sports landscape, and they are here to share their personal experiences, insights, and perspectives on youth sport and what sport has brought them in their own lives. And hopefully we can help you become a better sports parent and ultimately improve the entire youth sports landscape for all children who participate. Well, Steve Mesler has gotten his life from sport. A national champion in high school in the sport of track and field, he was off to the University of Florida, where the Olympics were in his sights. But a series of injuries led him ultimately to bobsled, where he would achieve his Olympic dreams. Steve is also a high achiever out of sport. He has founded an incredible initiative called Classroom Champions with his sister, and one that empowers kids through the power of sport by connecting them with world-class athletes. So high achievement is most certainly in his DNA. But Steve, as you will hear, has had struggles of his own. But it's through the power of sport that he's been able to continue on his path and help empower others through his conversations and his experiences. Steve is a husband, he's a father, and he's got two young kids that are just in the infancy of their own youth sports experience. So he has plenty here to share on this episode of Better Sports Parents. Thank you very much for doing this, Steve, and spending time with me here on Better Sports Parents.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. I'm wearing my gear because it's Olympic season, but I'm now putting all my focus on the Canadian side of the border.
Oh, well, that's very nice to hear. Our audience, being primarily on this side of the border, will resonate with that. But I want to talk about your upbringing as well. But before we get to any of that, why are you passionate about youth sports?
Sport gave me everything I have in my life. And it started when I was 5 years old playing soccer in Buffalo, and it, graduated to track and field and soccer when I was 11. It's what I did in my backyard 360 days of the year, playing street hockey and playing basketball. Gave me my, university scholarship, and I live in Calgary today because I started with sports when I was a kid and, grew up getting to live my dreams. So I love the concept that, we get to give kids this opportunity where their lives are in front of them. And when I look at it from my kids' perspective, because now as a parent of an 8.5-year-old and an almost 4-year-old, I look at it from their perspective of it gives kids this opportunity to understand how to be good at something, what it takes to be good at something, what it looks like, what the preparation is to be good at something. And, if kids get that out of sport, I'm happy.
So obviously played soccer and you mentioned a number of sports there. You sort of answered the multi-sport question before I ever got there. It sounds like you did a little bit of everything. I know you said you played soccer at 5. Were you involved in a lot of sports then? Was it pickup? How did your parents initiate you in the sports environment?
The other side of the math that you could run if you run my third Olympics was in 2010 is that I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So growing up in the 80s and in the early 90s, there wasn't as many opportunities for organized sport also. And organized sport was just different. So for me, it was, as I mentioned, it was street hockey in the backyard in Buffalo. It was breaking every single pane of glass within eye shot that you could literally sit in my parents' old backyard and see every single pane. And every single pane you can get eyes on, we broke with either a street hockey ball or a basketball. And doing that, but organized, it was only soccer, and then it was soccer and track. And my dad didn't make me choose until about my junior year, so about grade 11. He did make me choose in the summertime, and track was going to be my path at that point. So I still played high school soccer though.
That's a very different environment than we find today. Kids specialize so much sooner than you're talking about, and we're of approximately the same vintage, so that certainly resonates with me. What was it about track that caused you to gravitate to that sport ultimately?
I was good at it. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I am a strong believer in kids will gravitate towards the things that they can find success at. And success may mean scoring more goals or may mean that, or success may mean making better friends. It may mean something like that, but they're going to gravitate towards those things.
How did your parents define success in sports at that age? Was it based on results or was it based on something else?
That's a great question. I've had this conversation with them. I mean, I look back, my parents were both school teachers and they raised two kids, myself being an Olympic gold medalist, and then my sister having a PhD in education. I have a daughter and a son. And if you told me one of them was going to be Olympic champion and the other one was going to be get her PhD, get their PhD at something, I would say, sign me up. I'd be very happy with those outcomes. For them, they just wanted us to be doing things. We grew up in Buffalo, which especially in the 80s and 90s was one of the poorest cities, the third poorest city in the country. We were 3 blocks away from not such great areas, and they recognized sports as something that we could do, keep us busy, keep us out of trouble. And my dad was also an athlete growing up too, so he quickly saw. And my sister was a talented athlete that was an all Western New York track runner, and went and ran track and field at University of Pennsylvania in her first year. So he saw the abilities there, and he certainly recognized that in me at a young age as well. So I think their philosophy, really, from having the conversations was with them, was to keep us active, to keep us busy, and to help us find things that we were good at.
The sports that you mentioned, soccer, track, and then all of the pickup sports, those are easy entry, easy access sports, the way that you describe participating in them. Was access ever a challenge, or was it more trying time constraints? You didn't have time to do some of the other organized sports?
Access was a bit of a challenge. Again, my parents were teachers, so we were not, teachers in a poor city, so we were not all that wealthy. My dad worked summer school for us to do summer track and field and travel the country doing junior Olympics and regionals and nationals. So we never felt access being a problem though. As kids, if there was an access problem, they did a great job shielding it from us. I don't ever remember conversations about we can't go do that because we don't have the resources to do it. But again, like you said, those are pick up basketball, pick up street hockey, and then soccer and track are probably four of the five or six least expensive sports. And I say this being somebody who lives in Calgary and is in the mountains Saturday and Sunday every day with our daughter's ski team, and who now is 8.5 years old and needs 2 sets of skis. The next year, she'll need 3 sets of skis. So I'm on the other side of that as a parent right now, and love it. And she also does karate, and we can talk about all the things that my kids do, and how I look at that for them. I'm sure later.
Yeah, I certainly do want to get into what your kids do right now, but just in general, when you look at the youth sports environment, and you're on a different side of a border now, and times have changed, but access and affordability are at the forefront for a lot of parents. Jumpstart just released its state of, you know, youth sport for 2025, and the things that came out was 33% of parents are very concerned and stressed about affordability, and there's 25 that are overwhelmed by the logistics of it. Has it become too costly, and has it become too overwhelming from a logistics standpoint in your perspective?
It would depend on how you define two. If it's still happening and people are still doing it, then the answer to that is technically no. Um, we're blocking out other parts of the population. We are again, my kids skiing. The amount of money that we'll spend on that is probably the amount of money that my parents spent on all of our sports combined for 10 years, and we'll spend that probably this year on skiing. Obviously, it's an institution now. Obviously, people have jobs. These used to be relatively volunteer or relatively inexpensive things to do. I'm kind of in the middle when it comes to this individualization of sport at younger ages and the benefits of such. It's very easy to point to people like me and point to people, other people who did a lot of sports when they were growing up and then they became successful at the one because that's what everybody did back then. Now, if I had to compete for scholarships against somebody who only did the one thing over and over and over again, track and field is a different lens. I mean, track and field, there's so much genetic athleticism that is required there. You could try to make me become Usain Bolt all you want, and that's just not going to happen. And that's the same across. But all these other sports, the more skill based you go, I have a hard time arguing that that isn't helpful to a certain degree when it comes to skill based sports, whether that's baseball or similar sports in that way. But I can't answer your question of leaning into it. Of is it all too much now? Depends on your definition of too much.
That's a fair response. And I do think, depending on the situation you find yourself in and the geography, especially that you find yourself in, that answer may change for a lot of different people. When we go back to your youth sports experience, obviously you were extremely strong in track and field. You were a national champion by the time your high school career was all said and done. Were you extremely strong in other sports as well, or were you good good enough to play, but perhaps not at the top of those classes?
My choice was really, it was either in the US, we always rank things on Division One, Division Two. I could have gone to a smaller Division Two program for soccer or a flagship university for Division One for track. I chose very eyes wide open. I chose the bigger experience. I've always been somebody, I'm very proud of the kid in me who always did want to put himself into these more challenging situations, and I always preferred to be a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in an ocean, and that was my choice. So I did have those. I did have that choice to be able to do. So I was good at soccer. I was all Western New York. I was the only freshman that started, so grade 9 that started on our high school team. So, but a lot of that was based upon my athletic ability that then was clearly, shined brighter in track.
Well, it's interesting that you would go from Buffalo to Florida because Florida is a mecca for speed, whereas I've
Yeah.
never heard Buffalo referred to as Track City, USA.
No, no.
How did you achieve that level of success outside of genetics? Because at that time, especially, the state of Florida kind of recruits within the state of Florida for speed.
Yeah. Look, I had a couple really great formative experiences when I was a kid. I look back and say I probably ran out of pure natural talent when I was about 12 years old. 11 years old, my dad put me in track and field for the first time. The first year doing track, I made it to the national track meet and got 13th place, I think, in high jump. The next year, moved up in age group, didn't qualify for any individual event to the nationals. And I vividly remember having a conversation with my dad saying, "What happened? Like, what happened? It's not just an age thing. What happened?" Said, "Well, I think you've got to learn how to work hard." Said, "Okay, what does that mean?" And he said, "Let me figure it out." So he went to the library and looked up and found a book about plyometrics. Now, everybody talks about that now, but in 1990, wasn't a thing that people did. So I had the opportunity to lose when I was that age. And then I had somebody around me, my dad, who helped me figure out the problem. And he basically said, you got to learn what to do, figure out what went wrong, learn what to do, and go do it. So it was a really simple way. We built these two boxes in Buffalo, in our Buffalo garage, that were about 16 inches tall, a unit like this, put blue carpet on it from our old carpet that had been pulled up from our old living room that was still rolled up in the corner of our garage. And every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, this little 12-year-old Steve went out to the garage without my dad needing to tell me every day, went out to the garage and did 100-foot contacts because my dad said this would get you better. And my goal that year was to get a medal at the national track meet, which was a top 6, was to medal at the national track meet. And I not only went and got one medal, but I medaled in the 200-meter hurdles, the triple jump, and the pentathlon. So 5 events in 1992 at the Mount Sac, where the Mount Sac relays are in California. And I vividly remember calling my dad and telling him, because he was back home having to pay for it, working summer school, and he cried on the other end of the line. And for me, that was such a formative experience that, like, I'd never seen my dad cry before. He's from, rural outside of Buffalo. That is not a thing that I saw my dad do. He's a little squishier in his older age now, but back then he wasn't. So I had that happen. And then the second thing I had happen to me was I grew up in Buffalo. Early 90s sports, you tell me what was going on in Buffalo.
A lot of losing Super Bowls.
A lot of losing Super Bowls. Exactly. And here I am, again, 12 or 13, Scott Norwood, wide right, loses the Super Bowl for a city who's never been to a Super Bowl, never won any titles, had not won anything until I went and won the Olympics in 2010. And I remember sitting watching the city gather in the square in front of downtown, in front of the city hall in Buffalo, and 20,000 people showed up. And this was the first Super Bowl loss. And the whole place started chanting, "Scott, Scott, Scott." And little Scott Norwood walks out, not thinking anybody was going to want to hear from him. And he addresses the crowd. And here I am at 12, 13, going, "Oh, you can lose and everybody will still love you. Good to know." Like, if you don't know any different, you don't know any different. So I had these two opportunities at these really formative ages. And I gave that talk. I told that story when I got put in the Buffalo Western New York Sports Hall of Fame in 2011. And Jim Kelly was in the crowd for it. And Andre Reed was in the crowd for it. I think Bruce was there as well, because one of their guys was getting inducted with me. And I told them, like, look, your losses weren't in vain, because I learned that you can lose and everybody around you, your community will still love you. And I spent my entire career failing all the way up until the point where I didn't. And I think those were the two things. So sorry for taking on a long rabbit hole there, but I think I really, really value that. I recognize what it did for me. And then I try to give my kids those little situations on a regular basis to experience that.
It's really interesting that your two formative experiences on the athletic side at that age involved losing and a different reaction to both. One, I'm going to lean into this because I don't want to have this happen again. I'm going to do everything in my power to change that. And the other being, oh, even if I lose, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay as a person and my world doesn't fall apart. That's really interesting and such a keen observation at a young age, because I think there's a lot of people that never find that through sport. And maybe we need to be a bit more explicit about that. Would you agree with that?
100%. Well said. I think being able to help kids identify what happened and then help them unpack it as you can, because that's, we'll talk about Classroom Champions, but one of the things that I founded Classroom Champions for was I believe so much in the power of sport, and I believe so much in the lessons you learn. But I also believe you're kind of just hedging bets by, like, we're going to have 50% of youth participate in sport. And then 50% are going to get the positive experiences that will mold their lives. And then 50% of them might actually retain that and make it solid for them. Or we could just extract all the lessons that are part of that, turn it into a curriculum, and have 100% of kids do it because they have to be in school by law. And that's where the genesis of Classroom Champions really came from, was it's not explicit enough. Like Andrew Ladd, who's got a hockey player who's got his 1616 organization, does a great job of this in the locker room for hockey teams. And hopefully he can grow it to become bigger and do more, where taking those lessons and making them more explicit. I think that's such a great way to put it, Scott.
No, you're right. And Andrew's been on this podcast before, and I'm sure there's going to be some overlap between what you say and what he said. But addressing the mental health of children is kind of the angle he's coming at it from. And he's a guy who said he was in a dark place at one point during his career. And I didn't think we would talk about this as early as we are, but I know this is a challenge that you have faced in your own life as well. You've spoken openly about being clinically depressed at one
Yep.
point in time. What led to that experience for you?
That is a longer that's a long path to get there. For me, it didn't happen like a lot of athletes. It happens kind of post Olympic depression, the Olympic blues that turned into that, which is a real thing. For me, it happened a good 9 years later. For me, it was life. It was that any of us could go through. It was a combination of the pressures of a new family, being a new father. it was my job. Classroom Champions was our fiscal years in the summertime. The winter time, I'm always looking beyond that and seeing the edge of payroll and the stress of that would always come in the winter time for me. You had living in Calgary, so it's dark, so you have seasonal affect happening. And then I had a bit of an autoimmune issue in the summer and fall that I'd never had. Inflammation is actually often a precursor to depression. It's not that they're not that they're correlated in that way. And then lastly, for me, it was in that time, my big bout of depression was winter, January 2019 through like the spring there. And we were going through just hell on the US Olympic Committee's board of directors. It was, well, I shouldn't exaggerate it. The women who we were trying to help figure out those problems had gone through hell. We were on the edge of the edge of the hurricane at that point for it. And all of those things were collapsing in on me. And I found myself at one point, we're fortunate enough to have a gym in our basement. And I wake up, I'm somebody who wakes up at 5 a.m., works out. I would come downstairs and I would find myself not being able to move off the couch. And I'd cry. My wife would find me an hour later crying on the couch. And she was smart enough to know what she was looking at. I had no idea. I'd never experienced anything like that before. And yeah, I had some other pretty deep moments there. And those are all to answer your question. That's what led up to it. And I think the last part of it too was as somebody like me who's used to an upward trajectory in life. I was used to things growing and getting better and doing things. I found myself mired in real life and thinking that those rules maybe didn't apply to me anymore. I didn't need to keep learning I didn't need to keep on doing, keep on doing, keep on doing. And I think the lesson I really took away was when you're somebody who's used to being an upward trajectory, a flat trajectory is actually going down. And that really was the last nail in the coffin for me. And look, I come from a sport that I buried 2 of 6 guys that I competed with at the Olympic Games from mental health issues. We have a lot of head trauma. Both of those guys had CTE in their brains. I likely have some of that in there, so I recognize I'm at a higher, proclivity to having depression. So I keep that now in my life. I keep that at the forefront. I keep that at the forefront of the people that I work with, and I make sure that my body and mind are strong enough to make sure I don't go back to there anymore.
I'm really sorry to hear about your teammates, and thank you for
Thank you.
sharing that. I also would love to know, and I hope our audience gets something from this as well, how you were able to ask for help. Because often people who have on the surface been so successful and found a way through it many times on their own, like you going into your garage and doing those box jumps 3 days a week, the hard work behind the scenes, often people from that level lean into it on their own and they don't want to show what has traditionally been considered weakness, but I hope most people know is not. How did you get help?
For me, it was really helpful to equate it to my sports career. As an athlete, mind thing, and as a guy too, because we have to remember that most men older than the age of 25 or 30, the only men that they saw on television or in movies that talked about their feelings were the guys who got their butts kicked. That's what our childhood was like. So talking about your feelings and admitting these things was not a pattern that we had recognized before that. But for me, man, I spent a decade. People wanted to hear about my athletic story, and a big part of that was hurting. Having elbow surgery and being hurt for 4 years in a row at University of Florida, and having this like failure of a career as a track athlete after being national champion, having a failure of a career as a track athlete, and that's what got me into bobsled. So I was fortunate again to have that experience where I knew every time something went down, I rose higher afterwards. So for me, I recognize real fast, and if anybody who's either suffering right now or has been there, I can tell you, if you can get through this, you will be stronger for it. You will be so much stronger for it. And I recognize that injury story in sport didn't make me a lesser athlete. It in fact helped my story. And from my brain's perspective, I felt like my brain was broken. I couldn't make decisions when I was in the midst of a depression. Living in a cognitive world, I was CEO of a company that I needed. That's basically my only job, was making decisions and helping others make decisions. And I couldn't make decisions. And when I recognized that, it helped me go, okay, my brain's broken, just like my hamstring or just like my elbow. When a hamstring was hurt, I wouldn't just go to the line. I would go to my trainer and I would go to my physio and I would go do all these things. I need help with this. And as soon as I was able to make that link, and for me, the pivotal moment was, deciding not to step in front of the light rail in Calgary in the middle of the winter time. And that was the moment that snapped me out. Okay, this is rock bottom. I need to do something, or else the next time I have that choice, I may make the wrong choice. So I got a counselor, went to my doctor, got on medication, found a counselor, started talking to a couple friends about it, started talking to my wife about it more. And I recognized that that connection had been missing in my life with people. Um, Started finding some things to get good at. A clinical psychologist will start with working with somebody. They'll say, "All right, you're going to just make clean your room this week." They'll come back the next week and go, "Couldn't do it, couldn't do it." All right, we're going to just make our bed this week. We'll come back the next week, couldn't do it. All right, we're going to square our pillow. They'll come back, I did it. All right, great. We're going to make our bed, and then they'll just go to the lowest common denominator and give somebody a feeling of achievement. Because the connection with others and the achievement, these are things that were programmed for these things. Like this is hundreds of thousands of years. And we're writing a book on this right now because of the experience I had coming out of depression. And I was able to set some goals. And my goal was I wanted to live again like I did when I was an athlete. I just loved that. I loved the challenge and I loved the camaraderie and I loved the purpose. And I wanted to find that again. And I spent the last 7 years rebuilding my life to be able to do that. And that was incredibly therapeutic for me, but also additive because now I can walk away and say, I had this really giant experience on the upper end of the threshold of life of winning an Olympics. And then I've had the opportunity and the pleasure and the honor of experiencing one choice from not being here anymore. And as a man, what that opens up is like, it's given me so many tools. I have so many tools now that I never had before. And it helps me with the work that I do with executives. It helps me with the work I do with athletes. It brings me joy to be able to talk about those things and have a vocabulary that I never had before. And the best part of it is like no guy's ever walked into another guy's garage and gone, "You have too many tools." So again, for those guys that are out there struggling right now, lean into the tools you're gaining because no guy's going to walk into your garage X amount of time from now and say, "You have too many tools." They're just not. They're going to be impressed.
It's a really good analogy. And I just want to clarify for myself and for our audience, in case they don't understand, when you say not stepping in front of the light rail transit, the LRT in Calgary, that's not
Yeah.
something you were just visualizing. How
No, that was me
physically,
walking down the street and deciding, having a conversation in my head that many people in these positions have, which is, will my family be better off without me? And there's the train. I'm about 5 steps away from it. Uh, and, those were like, it's really hard. And I don't enjoy talking about it. Like, I don't. Uh, I also don't enjoy running, and I do that almost every day. And I don't enjoy the fourth set of squats that I did this morning, but I do that too because it's good for me. And I think we avoid these conversations. And again, I think to the main topic of today, that's what sports teaches kids is that like sometimes you just don't want to do things, but they are in fact good for you. Sometimes that's going to hurt, but it is in fact good for you. And I feel so fortunate that I had those experiences in my rearview mirror because they helped me build myself back up in a way that is, I'm a better human being than I was as an athlete. I'm a better partner and a better father than I was before I went through that experience. Uh, and I love that, and I'm proud of that. And sport also gave me the ability to celebrate wins in a way.
when you think of what you just spoke of, and thank you very much for sharing that, and you look back at all of the injuries you had at the University of Florida where it didn't work out the way it was supposed to. And as far as a recruit goes, I mean, you're as five-star as they get, national champion. You're going to basically Speed City, USA
Yeah,
for university. It was all set
yeah.
up for what you thought was going to materialize in Olympic gold in the sport that you had chosen at that point in time. In relation to this conversation, how did you get through those experiences of being injured year after year after year and it not going according to plan without having some very serious mental health setbacks?
That is a fantastic question. Um, I probably was too in myself to recognize it or know any better. I knew what I was capable of, and I just kept not getting there. And I think the hope of what I was capable of is the thing that kept driving me to get there, to be able to maybe do it. And it's the thing that when I would get hurt, okay, if I can get healthy, I knew what I was capable of. And I had the chance to work with a woman named Dr. Quintana Adolfo, who's the used to at one point ran mental health out at Six Siga First Nation, which is just outside of Calgary here. And she talked about we were doing a partnership between Six Siga and Classroom Champions, and I asked her, what do you want Classroom Champions to bring to the nation? Like, what would be your hope? What's the best outcome? What is success? The classic question, what does success look like? And she had said, above all else, I just hope it can give our kids hope. And this was a time of which I was very skeptical of the concept of hope. And I was at a corporate talk that I gave a few weeks ago in California, and their president, I started talking about this, and somebody chimed up, well, I would answer your question, but Scott said we're not allowed to use the word hope. And I cheered because I know why. And I would say the same thing to our researchers who are looking at goals and hope. But I asked Dr. Q, I was like, what does that mean to you? What does it mean? How do I measure that? How do I know? And she said, you measure the definition. The definition is my actions today will make my tomorrow better. And that's the definition of hope. And from that moment on, it completely changed my perspective on hope. What else do you want in life? What else do you want in life than to think the thing I do today is going to make tomorrow better for me? Whether it's going to the gym, whether it is, well, many of our First Nations will have that issue because these kids, they can get an education, but they don't think they can go anywhere. They can eat better, but they don't think it's going to make them healthier. All of these things. So then why would you bother? Why would you not have the sugar? Why would you not have the indulgences if you don't think doing the good thing is going to make your tomorrow better anyway? So when I think about all that, I think ultimately it was that definition of hope that, well, if I can just do this, and so many people do not look at their lives in that way. And if you can start to look at things and say, the thing I'm going to do today is going to make my tomorrow better, then you start to go, what can I do today that's going to matter? And then you start to focus more and more on the things that matter. And you start to focus less and less on the things that either you can't control or that won't make your tomorrow better. And that understanding really has changed my perspective on both from leadership to like the way I frankly like look at parenting.
It's a very good point, and the way you got there and the segue in was Classroom Champions, which we've mentioned a number of times but haven't fully explained. It's a phenomenal initiative that you and your sister co-founded. I'm not sure exactly how the idea came to pass, but how do you hope to provide hope through Classroom
Yeah.
Champions, and what is the mechanism by which you do that?
So Classroom Champions is a nonprofit and charity that works across the US and Canada. I chair the board of directors now. We have an amazing CEO in Seth Rosenzweig who runs the organization on a day-to-day basis. And the organization's mission is to increase and improve engagement and resilience in kids. And we do that through the mechanism of world-class athletes, whether they are Olympians and Paralympians, Team Canada athletes who are heading to Italy as we speak, and a curriculum and a mentorship program that's underneath that. And it's just like this. It's using the technology that you and I are on right now. We professionally develop teachers. We support entire schools. There's about 450,000 kids that will be participating in Classroom Champions programs across the US and Canada this year alone. Um, and we see incredible results. We see improved engagement. We see improved resilience. We see improved mental health. Because ultimately, one of the giant metrics for mental health that we tend to miss the forest through the trees on this is that they did an 18-year longitudinal study, and people who are high in levels of goal persistence and positive reappraisal have materially less anxiety and depression. Okay, what does that mean? That's a whole lot of clinical words. What does that mean? It means that people who, on a daily basis, they have some things they want to achieve, and they just do things to head towards that. That's how our biology is meant to do. And then people who, if something bad has happened to them, and athletes are fantastic at this, just like I was when I was an athlete, something bad has happened, they can find a reason to make it good. I'm hurt now. Well, I'm going to get a little more rest and I can do this or I can do that or I can learn more about that. And those two things. So we're actually starting to see really incredible proactive mental health outcomes from the students in the schools that are participating in Classroom Champions now. And it's honestly, Scott, it's wild because hundreds of athletes volunteer for this thing. And they've got a great staff that supports teachers in schools everywhere. And couldn't have imagined that it's turned into it. And it really just came from I was living the life that 10-year-old kid in us would have dreamed of. My sister was getting her PhD in education and social policy at the time. And we just thought, I'm never going to have the ability to impact kids in the way I do going into my last year of those Vancouver games. Let's do something with it. And that was the genesis of the idea started there.
Obviously, it is about supporting the kids, giving them tools and improving them in all of those different facets that you just mentioned. But has there been a derivative effect on the athletes that you've employed in this regard? Because as you and I both know, a lot of athletes tie their self worth and their identity to what they
Got it.
do, and that becomes who they are. This to me seems to be a mechanism by which they would realize, oh, what I do translates to other areas of my life.
You got it, man. You nailed it. I couldn't have said it any better than you. Yes, we see that. What you just said, Scott, is what we see. It provides athletes, these kids are cheering for them, but they do not value these people because they get first or second. They value these people because these people have invested in them. And that's the trick. These athletes are assigned to a school. They are that school's athlete mentor. They are getting communications from that athlete on a biweekly basis. These athletes are explaining and unpacking what goal setting is. They're not just saying, hey, it's important to set goals, go. They're saying, this is what a short-term goal looks like. This is what a long-term goal looks like. This is who you tell your goals to. This is what happens when you reach your goal. This is what happens when you don't reach your goals. And the whole idea was like how I grew up with Wayne Gretzky on my wall. I remember those ones with the ruler, the posters with the ruler. And I grew up to be like literally eye to eye with Wayne in his skates. And I always thought, how cool would it be if I could learn from Wayne how to be successful? If I could learn from Wayne what he was doing to get to where he is. And that's the magic of Classroom Champions is these athletes are in the midst of they're not the gray-haired has-beens like me. They are athletes who are in the midst of their excellence, focused, because the message gets watered down by adults all the time. So we want them to just titrate that focus and the determination and what it takes and what it means. And then we want to give the athletes an opportunity to share it with somebody. And Brooklyn McDougall is a speed skater for Team Canada. Classroom Champions posted this, I think, last week. She sent her kids a little video about like telling them she qualified and got named. They were one of her first places to go. And it gives up, especially Olympians and Paralympians, it gives them this fan club that they've never had before.
That's fantastic. And creating those relationships is such a big part of sport as well. And we know from the research that that's why children enjoy youth sports. They want to have fun, they want to be with their friends. Yes, they want to improve their skills, but it's those other reasons before that. And winning and competition that comes later for most kids as well. And yet it does seem like in today's youth sports environment, we've compressed that pyramid that we're pushing kids to specialize so early, and we are classifying them as quote unquote elite at very early ages. One of my fears with that is that that identity piece and that self-worth piece we touched on
Yep.
will actually become more prevalent. Do you have any of the same concerns?
I look at it through a different lens, and I understand that lens. I look at it through a lens of I think my job as I think you have to break down what you think your job is as a parent, and then have that agreement with your kids. Like quite often, I'll talk to our younger one's a little bit too young for this, but I'll start talking to him about this soon. So Brett, our daughter, who's 8.5 now, I'll ask her, "What do you think my job is? Like, what do you think my job is in terms of you and me?" And if you ask that question to your kids as a parent, it'll opens up a giant opportunity to have an important conversation, which is my job. I believe my job is to give them the best opportunity for them to be able to do whatever it is they want and be successful and content in life when they grow up. To me, full stop. My job isn't to love them. My job isn't to do these things. If you were to, if you ask the question, would you rather, if you could say not loving your kids would turn them into a happy, successful, well-adjusted person who could accept love and do these other things, would you be so selfish as to impose your love if it blocked that? Now, that's not how life really works, but I think the question is a question to ask yourself. which is more important? And to me, the most important thing is the goal, which is helping them do that. And if I can, and I say to her, like, loving you and supporting you is part of my theory that helps you get there. And having that conversation allows you to then have these broader conversations when you are, when you're telling them something they don't want to hear. And they can take it through a lens of, I'm only saying this because I want you to be successful and have the best chance to be. It's up to you to be successful. It's up to you to be happy. You control that. I don't control whether you're happy or not. You do. But it's my job to put you in a position to give you that opportunity. So then when I think about, well, first of all, I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, it's a great point, and I might have to steal part of your answer or reframe mine because my kids, I know exactly what they'll say if I ask them because I've told them since they could understand what I was saying, and
Yep.
literally, I told them my job is to keep you safe and healthy, and it's not gonna feel good sometimes with some of the decisions I make because my choice will be to defer to that. And I
Hmm.
love the way that you framed that. And it certainly made me think about that answer for them as well. But I know exactly what my kids will say back to me when I
Yep.
ask them that because I've told them that forever. And I do see sport as one of the ways to use that as a vehicle to get there.
Yep.
And again, I think safe and healthy is building strong, independent children who become strong and independent adults and can make those decisions that you talked about a little bit earlier. How do you see sport as a vehicle for that?
So that leads us in there, since I think my job is not to keep them safe and healthy. My job is to give them the opportunity to be successful, because sometimes it means that they might get a little, unsafe. To me, that's just everybody has their own. Their own. I'm not here telling people how to parent, but that is my lens on it. Now, from you sports perspective, and why I have like a slightly different thing is, I've noticed that everybody always asks, like, my daughter does skiing, she does karate, she does flag football, which is awesome. Thank you, CFL, NFL, for bringing that. Like, she's just like loves it so much. And then skiing, and that's like skiing has been the thing that she has been the best. It's her best sport so far. But up until a couple years, probably up until last year or this year, she didn't really like it all that much. Um, and here I think is the trick for parenting, which is, because everybody had asked me, "Oh, you do this, you do that. Oh, does she like it? Does she love it?" And I kind of step back and go, "Okay, well, if we agree sport, I think we all can agree on this call that sports are good for kids. They check a whole lot of boxes that are really hard to check in other parts of life. So if we kind of agree, if we have a place of alignment, which is sports are good for kids, they help them, navigate problems. It helps them, resilience. It helps them, connect with other kids and learn how to be a team and all these kinds of things. So, okay, alignment's there. Is going to school good for kids? Yes. Is going to sleep early good for kids? Yes. Is not eating candy good for kids? Yes. Well, if you ask your kids, do they want to go to school? If they like it at school, well, if you ask your kids, do they like doing their homework? If you ask your kids, do they like eating their vegetables? They would say no to many of these things. But for some reason, sports is the one thing that everybody cares about, whether they like it or not. And if we agree that doing your homework, going to bed early, and going to school is good for you, and we agree sports is on par with that, I think people like us believe sports is just as important as those things. Why is sports the one thing that people ask, do they like it?
It's a great point.
Uh, so my perspective isn't to drag and kick and scream, but what I watch for is, what does it do for them? And my daughter, man, it was hard to get them up early in the morning, and it's dark and it's cold, and skiing is hard when you're young. And she wouldn't tell people she loved it or liked it, but I would watch her on a good ski day as a pretty quiet kid who, a bit introverted, maybe a bit neurodiverse. She would walk taller, smile more, laugh more, and talk more after a good ski day. And I didn't see that behavior after any of the other activities she does, from choir to karate to anything else. It did something to her. And I grabbed onto that. And I think that it's so easy to confuse kids not being good at something for them not liking something. Or she was cold. I had to separate cold and skiing. So I got her heated socks, and we're privileged enough. I could get her heated socks. I could get her better gloves, and we solved the cold problem. And finally now she loves skiing. I could see the joy in her. But if I would have given up because she didn't like it, for a couple of years, I would have robbed her of this opportunity to be good at something and the joy she has. So I think my, you know, perspective for parents is don't get so wrapped up in needing them to like it and then get mad and sad because it's frustrating also because you spend a lot of money, you spend a lot of time, and it can suck if they don't like it. Don't get yourself wrapped up in that. Remember what the goal is. The goal is for them to get and get all the things that we want them out of sport. So look for those things and consider that success before you consider. Now, again, don't grab them by the hair every day and pull them, find them another sport per se, but don't confuse not being good at something. Don't confuse them saying they don't like it with the value that it's bringing. That's my broader podcast version of unpacking that one, Scott.
Well, and I do think there's nuance in that conversation
Well,
because
yeah,
when kids are at a very young age, I think we can agree that yes, there has to be direction and there does have to be the parent facilitating that movement based activity, whatever it happens to be, or multiple ones, hopefully in an ideal world, at least from my perspective. There will come a time when your daughter gets to an age where she's going to choose. And if she really doesn't
yep,
like it, she'll have agency at that point in time, but
mhm,
hopefully sport has helped her develop that agency.
yeah, yeah. And if you and I also because I see this with others as well, and we thought long and hard at the U.S. Olympic Committee about the pipeline there too, which is if you start young of changing what the value proposition is for them, and are you good at making new friends out there? Are you? I'm still tickled to see our 3.5, almost 4 year old boy who's skiing now, and at that age, I always celebrate falling, and we talk about falling as learning. And if you ask either of my kids, falling means learning to them because they don't know any different. They literally do not know. You get to help shape them as a parent. And I love that part about parenting. If you tell them the sky is green, they will believe it's green all the way up until like they really get into school for far along. And if you use that mentality on that one and help them with a different value props, my hope is that then youth sports turns into this. And Canada, I think, has a better value system than America does on the value of sport in life. And Jumpstart and Marco do a great job over there. Kevin Webster here in Calgary with kids sport and what they do to get kids involved do a fantastic job of supporting youth sport in that way. But we have a better value structure because in the US, as soon as a kid gets a little bit good at a sport, American parents start thinking about scholarships. And you don't have that muddying of the water here in Canada. You do get to just focus on it from is it good for them?
Yeah, certainly in some cases, I do think that it can be pervasive in certain sports. And with how highly we value hockey, I do think that there are parents.
That's a whole different.
It is. It changes the conversation because it might not be a scholarship, but it might be junior hockey, and it might be the
I think
elite pathway, if you will. So I think that that water does get muddied at some point.
what's your perspective? I mean, on the hockey side of things, like what's your perspective on hockey in Canada? Where are the lights and where are the things that need to be changed and where are the things that are going well?
Well, there's a couple of things that concern me. And as a Canadian who is very proud of that being a part of our national identity, like most Canadians, I see a lot of the good side of it as well. I see what it can do for kids. I see the connections it makes. I also am very worried about affordability. When sticks are costing at minimum two, three, $400, that's nuts. That's the entry
Yeah.
fee for another sport. And then you got skates, you got all the other equipment. And I think there's only so much you can heap on families and then the extra time constraints. So I think that's a sport that I'm worried about participation long term for hockey and the amount of pressure that gets put on. I
What do you
do
think?
think that the other part of it, just I'll just finish there,
Yeah, no, keep
is
going.
that the elite word gets thrown around a lot in hockey. And I think people are so concerned with having that be a part of their identity and what they tell other people that they're less concerned with development and they're more concerned about being able to have that label. Those two things concern me a lot.
Makes sense. And then what do you think? Like my wife we had a daughter first, and she said if we have a second girl, I'm fine with them playing hockey. If we have a boy, I don't want either of them playing hockey. She said, I don't want the boy touching it. Like
Interesting.
that is, I mean, again, this is my Canadian, my side. Is that do you feel like that is a thing that's felt a little bit broader just from like the culture of hockey on the boys side?
I do think there is an inherent pressure in Canada for boys to participate in hockey. I think that it feels like part of the Canadian experience. I have two girls. We asked them both multiple times, multiple years, if it was something they were interested in doing, and neither of them gravitated toward it. So they
Uh-huh.
have never entered hockey. I think it'd be great if they happened to choose that sport. We would have put them in it, no problem whatsoever. But I
Yeah.
do feel like for boys, especially in certain places in Canada, rural Canada especially, it feels like almost a part of the initiation process that, well, everybody plays hockey, don't they? And I don't think it's the case anymore. I do think that there is a concern being felt across this country that we are pricing people out and maybe pressuring people out.
Got it. And what do you think about the I think as you've heard me a few times, right? I'm always thinking about end state. I'm always thinking about what am I trying to accomplish? And then all of my behaviors and thoughts kind of try to formulate around that as much as I can, get as much clarity on that. My challenge about hockey in this country is that in the US, we'll use the US example in a positive light as opposed to the more critical light before. The goal is to get a scholarship. But that means like your kid's going to college, university. Like that's a good thing. Like though the concept of a scholarship and pushing kids just because they're going to, either save money or it's going to give them these things, that is like there's a challenge there, but it's also inherently built around a good thing, which is going and getting a secondary degree. Hockey, on the other hand, the goal, like the best football player gets a scholarship to university and gets to go and gets a university education for free. Hockey, on the other hand, the goal is to have your 15-year-old boy leave your home and go live with other people who don't love him in a small town where he gets to be a god. When the Hockey Canada issues were happening before, I had just rolled off the US Olympic Committee board, and I was there the whole duration of uncovering the gymnastics scandal through congressional intervention, through the lawsuits, and then signing the check. So I got to see the whole ecosystem of trying to solve this problem. Some folks reached out to me about the Hockey Canada board, and I just wasn't, I'm not passionate about Hockey Canada like I am about the Olympic movement. So that was an easier one. But also, there's a part of me that kind of just feels like it's really, no one's talking about the elephant in the room, which is the goals are misaligned. Like if the end state goal is, and there's not many more crucial times in development of a boy than the teenage years to be around his parents who like a strong father and a loving mother who fill different roles for that young man going through all kinds of things. And in shocking news, we have some issues there, some both entitlement and all that. Like, how do you see that? Is there a way out of that?
Well, it would scare the hell out of me if I were a parent. But I have talked to parents who've been through it, some of them on this podcast as well. And I go back to the safe and healthy conversation. And I do think it's a little more nuanced than I make it out to my kids because I see sport as a safe place to fail. That's what I actually see it as. I see it as a place where, yes, you may have some physical injury at time, but that is a whole part of the process that toughens you up, for lack of a better term, and makes you more resilient for the actual world. And I've talked to parents about that with respect to, hey, what was that like having your child want to leave home to pursue his dream at 15, 16, 17 years old? And some are more in tune with it than others. Others were very
Mhm.
scared. Others say that's not the route we're taking. And I do think that's changed in the last 20 years in Canada, where there has been this push to get scholarships to the United States in particular,
Yeah,
as opposed to going to junior
makes sense.
hockey. Now, one of the big things that's changed in the last few years is that now if you play in the CHL, you are still eligible for an NCAA scholarship. So
Yeah, it's huge.
it is a massive change, and I knew it was inevitable because they were going to lose too much participation
Yeah.
because of that part of it. And for a long time, they've had scholarships to Canada that books and tuition would be paid for to a Canadian university. So there is an adaptation and a recognition there. But yes, I would have the exact same fears that you had. And it's part of the reason that we've had some of the problems in Hockey Canada, as you referenced.
I agree. Yeah, no, that's a great breakdown. I hadn't I hadn't looked at it and considered it also from that angle too. And but I agree with you. At the end, your end statement there is, I think, where both of our conversation or our thoughts come to the head, which is ultimately it is a culture of entitlement that happens, and that is going to be natural. Like I was an entitled athlete. I had that concept of entitlement. But again, when you go and you're 18 and you move into that level and everything's been you know you've worked hard and you're talented and the world is at your fingertips and you're entitled. But then you move into a university structure where there's a lot of good checks and balances there. There's an entire infrastructure around helping young people transition in life. Because you're not the only one. It's everybody around you is going through that, and they have other things at stake than you being successful at sports. But the entitlement factor that happens when you're 15 and you move into a town that for a lot of for a lot of people that is a way out. That is a really really tangible way out there to go do other things in life if that's what you want. And it is a fascinating part of the culture in Canada that, and it is to me, to me, it's the elephant in the room of the hockey conversation that no one in this country seems to be willing to have. And I understand why, because these towns, it provides entertainment and it provides all these things. But if the end goal is healthy, safe, humans, then it's a conversation that I just hadn't seen anybody bring up yet very much.
Back to your kids and the way
Yeah.
that you see youth sports for them. You said that your job is to help make them successful people. What represents success through sports in your perspective?
My job is to help them have the opportunity to be successful.
Correct.
Um,
Thank you for clarifying.
so the question was, how does youth sports?
Well, I want to know how you define success through sport for your children. What is success to you?
For me, success looks like they understand that to get better at something, because I think that's a really nice way to live your life. Continuously just feeling like you're looking for opportunities to get better. It's one of those like goals that we've had since that our ancestors have had that helps us in life. And if sports can give them the opportunity to understand how you do that, I think youth sports has done its job. That you have to prepare physically, you have to prepare mentally. You have to do that when you're an adult in a job. You have to recognize that there's a lot of different nuances and details that you have to think about. And oh, by the way, some of those are more important than others. So you have to prioritize. So you learn prioritization of like, what am I going to think about if I'm skiing down the hill? There's 30 things my body's doing. What are the first, second, third, fourth order things? If I'm bobsledding and I am wanting to get faster, where do I get the biggest leverage? Where do I get the most torque out of that? If youth sports can teach them that, and oh, by the way, you can't do it on your own. If you're an individual athlete, you need a coach, you need other people around you. If you are a team sport person, you can be as great as you want. But, I was on a call just earlier with I work with a British bobsledder and help him from a mental coaching standpoint. And his four-man team got on and we just all talked about these things. And I emphasized to them over the next 4 weeks, you guys have this really amazing experience that you look out for each other in a way that you won't do in a lot of ways, because I need you at your best and you need me at my best, which means we are symbiotic right now in a way that before we were competing against each other for roles and jobs and we could lose our spot in this or that. But you've been named, you're here now, which means now your roles are, if this bothers somebody, it's not just changing it to like virtue signal to them. It's actually having the empathy done. It's like empathy max. So if sport can teach them that as well, from a perspective that me helping you do the things you need to do helps me. And like, I think all of those things packaged up are what sport really is about. And if they can walk away, then it gets applied everywhere in life. And that's such a neat, there's nothing else we do in life that can add every single aspect of life into an activity. And that's the beauty of sport. And it's why human beings have always played things and competed and done that stuff.
One of the things I really love about the sport for which you became most famous, which is bobsledding, is that it is the epitome of long-term athlete development because almost nobody starts in bobsledding.
Yeah.
Almost nobody.
Yeah.
And you become an athlete who is now able to go onto a world stage and compete for an
Yeah.
Olympic gold medal by doing a whole bunch of other things to get there. And I think it's such a great analogy for most sports because back to the specialization, I take your point, and I think it's a good one that in certain sports, certain ages, it makes sense to women swimming. Yes, young ages, they're going to the Olympics in their teenage years and winning gold medals. I understand why you have to be an obsessive swimmer at a very young age in that particular sport. But I think for most sports, playing more, developing as a long term athlete ends up being better in the long run for whatever you choose. How do you look at bobsledding with respect to youth sports and the lessons that can be applied?
I mean, A, I think that if bobsled's around in another 20, 30 years, I'll be very happy. It's an expensive sport. It's a winter sport. It's hard. I live in Calgary, and there's a relic of a track that I can almost see from my front porch here that is not any longer in use. But yeah, to your point, athlete development. You don't. Kaylee Humphrey is a bit of an example. She started when she was 16. The rest of us are after university. So, but some of us, my first Olympic team, there was 10 guys. 4 of us were decathletes in our former lives. So it's this mismatch. Jesse Lumsden, a CFL player, who's now the high performance director for Team Canada. Cyrus Gray, who's a basketball player. Like all these things. So I think being able to just recognize opportunities. So that is the one thing about it doesn't have to end at the sport you do get good at. Is there are other opportunities, and if you are a speed or strength sport athlete, like bobsled is a fantastic thing. But you said something earlier, which was like obsessive. I missed that in my diagnosis of what I hope my kids get out of sport. It is such a beautiful place because it's really hard to do these things and get really good. Whether you want to be a high school provincial champion, whether you want to be a national champion, or whether you want to be an Olympic champion, it's really hard. And the people who obsess about it and can find ways to positively do that are going to be successful in sports, and then they're going to be successful in life. I do not know a multimillionaire or billionaire who isn't obsessive about certain things. And I'm not saying that that's just one like tangible metric of success is that side of things. It doesn't make I'm not saying it makes you happy, but it's a really good measure for that. A lot of people are competing for those dollars. And in order to do that, you have to be obsessive. And sport gets you to focus on the things that are obsessive. And you get good, you get obsessive about the right things. And that is like beautiful. And that is a thing that so many people who say, oh, I could have gone to the Olympics, or I could have done this, or could have done that. The amount of couldas and wouldas and shouldas, we should ourselves all the way into doing nothing because we're not willing to make some bets on what I can do and what I can obsess over and then just going after it. And I want that for people. I want that for my kids. I want for them so much so by their 20s and 30s, they have some things that are obsessive about because it's a joy of life that again, you can learn it through sport in a way that you can't anywhere else.
We talked about what parents' role is, and one of the things that I think was inherent to our discussion, but perhaps wasn't exactly named, was instilling values in your children as well. And then we need other people outside of our own households to help guide our children, whether they be teachers, whether they be coaches, and we're talking sports here. So I would love to know, in your mind, as someone who actually coaches high level executives for a living, what makes a good coach, especially in the youth sports environment?
Curiosity, number one. Number one, curiosity and curiosity about your athletes, curiosity about how to improve, curiosity about how to like what others are doing, curiosity about what the teams are doing. I think the coaches who are certain that they know all the answers and they're not curious anymore, they can only go so high. And I had the opportunity, a guy named Stu McMillan that I moved to Calgary for, who Stu went on to coach Andre DeGrasse in the Olympics in 2016 to his 3 medals. And one of my very best friends and somebody who like I learned obsessive behavior from in a lot of positive ways and a lot and I but I learned curiosity from. I spent a decade going to dinner with him probably once a week, and we would just talk about training. And I found a guy on the other side of the table who was my, superior for lack of a better term, who was curious, and we were always tinkering and always going. So I think the best coaches are the ones that are curious. And before I jump off this, or before I lose this thought, I want to say the gymnastics scandal that I mentioned earlier, which again, hundreds of women were abused by a doctor. Many of them mentioned it to their coaches. Many of them mentioned it to their parents. Nobody believed them. Uh, for many good reasons, that doctor Larry Nasser was very, very good at what he did. And it's very, very difficult to stop somebody like that. But what it taught me as a parent, which was, because the pendulum swung a little bit where the Olympic Committee started making these policies where athletes couldn't be one on one with coaches anymore, and they couldn't be one on one with physios anymore. And there's a trust factor that has to happen and develop between athletes, especially when you get up to the higher levels of performance, that you need to be able to trust. You need to be able to look at your coach and have your anxiety go down. because you believe in each other. And we were, policies started to go and the pendulum started to swing that we were cutting that off a little bit. But on the other side of it, we tell our kids, listen to your coach, right? Listen to your coach. That's like, we've all done it. Listen to your coach today. That was the problem. Yeah, we're all both like, we're both, guilty and the opposite of guilty of it. And I don't think you want to stop telling your kids to don't listen to your coach, but listen to your coach. And the mantra of that is what caused so much of the damage from abuse standpoint, because they were programmed. They are very deferential. Athletes are very deferential to authority, and it extends when they become adults from a psychological standpoint. But one thing you can do as a parent is you can tell them to listen to your coach, and then you can get in the habit of, at the end of practice, ask them and have forced conversations about what you and your coach talked about. So it's a Ronald Reagan, like, trust but verify, because you do not want to undermine the trust that's needed in the coach athlete relationship. And yet at the same time, you do not want to teach your children that the conversations they have with their coaches are just for them and they aren't going to talk about it. You don't want to ingrain that. I don't think it's a healthy human behavior anyway. So I wanted that came to mind as we talked about what makes a good coach, because a good coach can also have all kinds of opportunities because they have so much power over their athletes in the psyche.
You're right. And it's one of the things that I am so bullish on with regards to the younger generations that we see right now. And you will hear people that I would consider dinosaurs go, oh, well, kids are different. They don't listen the same way. No, they're more curious, to go back to that word that you talked about. And I think that these generations feel more empowered to ask why. My generation didn't. There were things that were done from a coaching perspective in youth sports and growing up that shouldn't have been done, but nobody questioned it because of that trust factor you talked about. And well, you listen to the coach no matter what. I want to encourage my children, and I imagine you're the same way, that when they do get to an age, not 6 years old, but even if they do at 6 years old, quite frankly,
Yeah.
if they ask their coach, why are we doing this? That coach should have a good answer.
Correct. Totally agree, Scott. Yeah, absolutely. And I very much agree with you that this generation, for whatever reason, like, it's the ebb and flows of generational things. Like, for whatever reason, this generation they feel entitled to an answer to know these things. And it may be connected to an increase in entitlement, which also isn't that great. But in that way, it's a positive side. So entitlement isn't always a bad thing. They feel entitled to know the answer. Great. Awesome. And that's where that coach athlete relationship happens, because over time they stop asking why so much, because the trust for the coach starts to build more and more and more in those ways, in a healthy way. And it's, again, I was a little bit traumatized from learning more information about that gymnastics scandal from the inside than I wanted to. And there was a time when I was walking into the Win Sports Gymnastics Center here, and I got a phone call in the midst of all that. My daughter was about 2.5. It was right before COVID, and I got a phone call from somebody from the media wanting to get a comment from a board member of the Olympic Committee, of which we, at that point, generally were not having those conversations. It was not my responsibility to be a spokesperson for the organization. But it was always ironic to me that I was getting those phone calls as I was walking my daughter into gymnastics. And it was such a juxtaposition of the position of authority that a lot of these people are in, who are so well-meaning, trying to figure this stuff out, and the role of parents in this world of just trying to help our kids.
It's really well said. And it's something I brought up a lot recently with people I've had in conversations and even with some of the guests on this podcast. And I love your thought on this, that oftentimes when we're selecting coaches for youth, organizations look at track records and experience in a sport, and that might be the be all end all. Not everywhere, but somewhere. How do we better incorporate the aspect of, well, how do you talk to children and how do you work with families? How do we better incorporate that into the vetting process?
It is that's such a great question. I'm not sure how you incorporate that in the vetting process. I think you have to incorporate that into the education. But in order for the coaches to want that, they have to recognize why. So just like we want to encourage our kids to ask the coaches why, the system has to have a better reason than so you won't harm kids as the why that you need these skills. And I think the system right now is struggling with that. It's struggling with, other than trying to diminish risk or trying to pass off risk, because, well, we checked the box and educated them and told them that these things weren't good, and then they went and did them anyway, so we're not culpable. I think we need a more positive, more proactive reason for it. I always love the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, and they're exploring how to plant an idea. And Leo's character's example is, I think a positive idea will trump a negative idea every time. I believe that is really, really true. That we've got to find the reasons why it's really good for you as a coach who's a hockey coach whose job it is in that case is to teach your kids to skate and pass and shoot and be a and and win, is actually changing the metric a little bit and saying, actually, your job is to teach them this teamwork and these principles. And I think it's getting better. And again, guys like Andrew Ladd are doing a great job of trying to permeate that space. But the fact of the matter is, like, this coach learned from their coach, learned from their coach, learned from their coach. And the role modeling is a generation or two off from solving the problem in that way. And I think we just have to be patient with coaches, and we have to be patient with people who don't. And a lot of these people are volunteering too. So all the extra things we're putting on them, all the safe sport courses, all of the other things, I both recognize that they're needed, and also that they're extra things that people aren't either aren't getting paid enough, or they're volunteering for. So I don't know. Like, how do you think that gets integrated in a way that isn't the pendulum being pinned so high?
Well, I do think it's part of the education process, and I do think part of it is observational as well. And it's a tough one to solve because not every organization can have a representative at all of the practices with kids to see how these people are applying the education. But I do think that word education is a big one. I think we all, as parents, understand that because we have ingrained in us certain behaviors from our own parents that we said, well, I'll never do this, I'll never do that. And then a tense moment or a stressful situation arises and you find yourself replicating those behaviors, but there needs to be a willingness to change and understanding that it needs to be better. And I think that's a part of that education process.
You talk to people about this all the time. Like, are you like, where do you think it's going? Are we on a? I hear a lot of things where, like, support for sport. There's a lot of people down on support for sport in this country. I look at it a little bit differently, personally, but I'm interested when it comes to this. Like, where do you think the trajectory is going? How long do you think it takes to get there, and what's the ideal state?
Well, I think we're both on the same page. And even though I ask questions about some of the issues in youth sport, I am a very positive, hopeful person. It's the reason I continue to give back to sport through volunteerism. It's the reason I continue to encourage people to be in sports. I love sports and what it can do for your life. In many ways, it's given me my life, not the same level you have gotten from it, but in a different way, it's given me my life. And I think there's so much positive that can come from it. I do think that we're approaching a critical mass with people across this country that want change. And we've seen it at the federal level with the Commission for the Future of Sport. And I think there are enough people who said enough's enough. It's not just enough for me to go, well, this is just the way it is. I guess we have to go with it. I think there's enough people out there building that. And this is part of the reason I want to have these conversations is to
Yeah.
bring people like yourself to the forefront and say, hey, there's enough of us here. We can do something about it.
What do you
I'm
think?
hopeful.
What's the change being called for? What is the? I don't want these three things anymore happening, and I think this should be. These are the three things that should be happening in sport in the country.
For me, it's exactly what you said a couple of minutes ago, and it's changing the metrics. And one of that is redefining success, what it means through sport. Like I see someone who's our age that is physically active as just as much of a win as someone who gets drafted first in the NHL because it's part of a healthy life. And I think we need to redefine that en masse. That's what I want for my kids. If they happen to do something with sport that they care about, awesome. But if they are 45 years old and playing in a rec soccer league because they enjoy being physically active, I see that as a win as well. I'm not sure how much you would apply from that standpoint, but I see it as a big part of a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, I want all the things. Like, I think that to me is where I get a little bit afraid of the change advocates, because it gets talked about as if we can only have one or the other.
Oh, I think we'll get both.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes that's the thing that's why I wanted to get your,
Hmm.
like, what you mean when you say that. Because I do get afraid of, I think some of the things that Jumpstart is advocating for are too over the top for me. I want performance to be, like, we're human beings. We are never going to have a problem with winning. I think it's fascinating to watch the Blue Jays run. What was their like? There was a slogan was like "Just win, baby" or something like that. What was it? Was it something like that?
Yeah, it's funny, I can't remember now. I was so caught up in it. I'm a massive Blue Jays fan, but it's escaping me at this moment.
It was something that was like hyper focused on winning. I did find it interesting to see the same people who are saying we want sports for all these other things also were saying just win when it came to the Blue Jays in that moment. And I'm like, how, you guys don't see that these are like like you're telling your kids it's all about just all this other stuff, but when you're sitting in front of the television with the Jays, you're not saying, "Hey guys, let's just focus on having a good time watching the game. Let's hope that they like enjoy themselves and learn some stuff from it." No, you're saying, "I want them to win," and when they don't win, you're sad. To me, I'm afraid of confusing kids because that is the adult behavior, and that is a human. It's a very human thing, and I think accepting that is a really, I think, own the podium is a wonderful thing. And also, we can do the other thing too. Like I think the sports spectrum to me is so broad and big that we can value that we can love sport. We can value that we can love all the things it does. And we can value that, I don't know the Canadian numbers, but we'll use the American numbers, but they're similar for Canada. The top 96 of 100 broadcasts, live broadcasts are sports. The other four are politics, winning and losing scenarios. Because as human beings, we are programmed to like achievement, status, all of these things are pretty genetic components for all of us. So that's where I think it's such an interesting thing of like, how are we going to solve this? And can we stop the rhetoric of it's one or the other? And can we say, let's promote success and achievement and attempting and trying? And then as you start to move into the promoting success, achievement, and trying to have achievement, then the trying conversation becomes learning of all this stuff. And in that way, I don't know what's your perspective on where the pendulum, I want the pendulum in the middle. And I'm afraid that,
Well, I think part of it has to do with that separation of results from self-worth. So, if I go back to a previous episode and a previous guest, Andrea Neal came on here, Canadian Sport Hall of Famer, Olympic athlete with Team Canada, stalwart of the Team Canada national women's team. And what she said, and I agree with, is separating the objective from the purpose. Look, our objective when we are playing that game, when you are going down the track, your objective is to win. That's not the ultimate purpose of the sport for the masses. Like, that's not the ultimate purpose, but it is the objective. And I think that's part of that clarity we seek with kids as well. That, okay, you won a gold medal. Does that make you a better person? No, makes you the same person who achieved this. It's a tough conversation to have with a 9-year-old, but
and yet I can tell you from lived
yeah,
experience, when you win a gold medal, people think you're a better person.
I agree.
And and now again, does that make you a better person? Is perception reality in that way? It kind of you get to choose. You get to choose whether winning a gold medal will make you a better person or not. And I like I'm so supportive of the concept of just like there's just parts of us that are like, the people who we have 10,000 generations of humans that have grown. And for all that time, the person who and the people who had achievement had status. If you had status, you had better access to food, better access to mates. You had all these things that are part of who we are. And I don't want to confuse my kids by telling them not to want those things and not to think those things. And to that urge in you is actually just ignore it and push it down. I think it is to what we've been saying this whole time is broaden the success metrics and broaden the understanding. Cause yeah, like if you're a high school athlete who's doing really well and is the best player in your team, yeah, it's great to have a goal to whatever it is. Go to university, you win this or do that. That should be the goal. You should be sad if you don't achieve it. You should be. If you don't, I mean, we had the conversation. I'm 4 blocks away from the house that I had when I was an athlete here in Calgary. And we had this amazing training group, Scott. Man, we had like Stu McMillan was our coach. Kaylee Humphreys, who's going to her sixth Olympic Games now, 4 for Canada, I think, and now the second for the U.S. She's won 35 gold medals, however many gold medals and medals she's won in the Olympics. We had Lascelles Brown was part of that group, and a bunch of others were part of this group, who are all medalists for Canada and some Americans. and we're watching the 2008 Beijing Olympics at my house. And it was an interesting cultural difference because you'd flip to NBC. I wanted it on NBC because I would want to watch the American athletes. And then you'd see an American athlete get fourth place and they were livid, livid. And then you'd flip it over the to CTV at the time, and you'd see a Canadian athlete get fourth or fifth. And they did what like the Classroom Champions founder of me would want them to do for kids, which was, like I did my best. I had a PB today. I had a great experience. And that I'm so torn over those kinds of reactions because I want people to recognize if you try at something and you work your life for it or you work years for it and you put everything you have into it and you don't achieve the goal that you had, it's okay to be sad. And I said to Kaylee, I would call her a little girl. I'd say, little girl, you get fourth place in Vancouver. If you get fourth place in Whistler, I'm going to jump across and if you react like that way, I'm going to jump across because I want you to be in pain because it's a learning experience. It's a life experience. And I want us to be very, and I think, somebody could walk away from here and be confused about what my message is. And I think that's okay because I don't have one message that it is all about a Classroom Champion style learning from sport. And I don't have one message that is all about this. My message is that sport is all of these things. And I hope that we can continue to make sport broad and a giant tent for all the people and not poo-poo on the people who are all about winning and not look down upon people who don't want to make it about winning. And I just get really afraid from the political context, Scott, that it's becoming a one or the other combo.
It's a really great place to end this because we won't have all of the answers today, but the whole point of this podcast is to share perspectives and get people talking because I'm sure you would say as a parent, I know I say all the time, I don't have all the answers. I'm going to tell you my lived experience and you apply what you can to your own life and see what works for you. Steve, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate the conversation. I feel like we're going to have another one at some point in the future.
This was great. And can't wait to watch all Team Canada athletes get after it at the Olympics and the Paralympics coming up in the next month or two.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.